Congressman. Good to see you as always. So,
Thank you.
This, I think, is one of your favorite subjects, the Federal Reserve revealing trillions of dollars in emergency aid, something like $9 trillion overnight loans. Are you surprised by this?
You know, in a little way, I thought it was bad, but it's probably worse than I thought. And I'm not totally surprised what they've been doing. That's one of the reasons why I've wanted an audit for a long time. Even though we're getting some figures out, it's nothing near what an audit would reveal. But the dollar numbers is very, very high, and of course the involvement overseas is one of the things I really wanted an audit for. But we did get some figures to show that we felt compelled to bail out foreign banks too, which is a real affront to the American people, because indirectly the American people have to pay for this.
And I think that's one of the things that shocked so many people. It's not just financial institutions here in the United States, also foreign banks. And let's not forget, I mean, it was GE, it was Verizon, it was Harley Davidson.
Yeah. And it shouldn't surprise us, because the dollar was given this responsibility of being the reserve currency of the world ever since 1971. So it was given much more power and privilege than it deserved. And at the time, after World War II, we had all the gold and we had the economic might and we weren't beaten down. But eventually, though, what happened was everybody started using dollars as if it were gold, and they put it in the reserves. And now, because they still trust the dollar to a large degree, as long as we print the dollars, we can bail out anybody. We can bail out California, we can bail out General Motors, we can bail out all the banks, we can bail out Greece, and now they're talking about helping the entire European Union. But there is a limit. The market will limit it, politics won't. They will think they can manage this, but they can't do it. Eventually, people will lose confidence and trust in the dollar.
But of course, their argument about all of these bailouts is that if we did this to stabilize the financial system, if we had not done this, we would have a depression on our hands. What makes you so sure that they're wrong about that things would have been better had they not done that?
They're not completely wrong, because there would have been some industries that were depressed. The companies that had lived off debt and lived off easy credit and got themselves into trouble, they would have had a depression. General Motors would have still had their problems, and the banks who had been involved in the derivatives, they would have had the depression. But instead, we printed the money, we bailed them out and argued, well, we don't want anybody to have a depression. So what did they do? They transferred all that bad debt onto the taxpayer, but the little guy got stuck. Who lost their jobs? And who lost their houses?
There was no requirement in there to loan to small businesses or help people modify their mortgages, which is something that they could have done. Why did they choose not to?
Because the way the system works, big banks and big corporations benefit from a fiat system, and that's why they like it. So the military-industrial complex likes it, the banking system likes it, and matter of fact, politicians like it too, because they participate in it. The congressmen, for decades have been able to vote for whatever they thought was necessary for their district. The deficits didn't matter that much. We would raise taxes, and if they got a little too high, we would borrow money, and if it got difficult and interest rates got up, we'd go to the Fed. And then the Fed would loan, create money, keep interest rates low, and keep passing it out. So the system was endorsed by a lot of people, and even the people who had houses, it did well for a while. The average person on the street indirectly did benefit. But when push came to shove, the big guys got the bailout. They were making a lot of money, and the little guys got stuck with mortgages that they couldn't pay.
So what is the connection then, between the actions that the Fed is taking and the national debt?
Well, we wouldn't have a national debt like that. It would automatically stop. If the Fed couldn't create money, if we were spending too much and we didn't want to raise taxes, we'd go to the market and we'd borrow. But if we borrowed too much, interest rates would keep going up, up, up. And if people say, hey, we're going to have a recession, interest rates 10, 12, 14, 15%, we better get out of the market. We have to cut down spending so the people would have the money. But if the Fed comes in, they allow that bubble and malinvestment to continue, so they create the credit. So if you allow the market to work, the signals would be there, and it would be turned off much sooner. The Fed shouldn't be allowed to monetize debt.
And the Fed, again, under fire for the second round of quantitative easing also. Many members of Congress, like you said, support that as well.
Right now, they're sort of waking up. There's more resistance now, not only from more members of Congress, but the average person now knows the Fed is involved in the bailout system. World central banks are complaining. European bankers have complained. And
they're complaining. They got so much money.
Yeah.
What are they complaining about?
But they're worried. They want to keep the money coming, but they want the money. They're sort of trapped. They want the money, but they want the money to maintain value. So maybe they got the money on QE1, and now they say, well, let's hold off now, because if you print too much more, the dollars I have might be devalued. So they're getting a little bit nervous about the system.
And you've been a critic of the Federal Reserve for some time now. And interestingly enough, in January, you're going to be the chairman of the House Financial Services Subcommittee, the House Monetary Subcommittee. How do you plan on using your power to further investigate this institution and perhaps really have an audit of the Fed, which again, you've been calling on for some time now?
Well, I haven't been appointed yet. I assume I will. I'm in line for it. And what I will do is use it as a good oversight committee of the Federal Reserve. And that means we want to know what they have been doing, and they have to explain what they've been doing, who's getting the loans. That means more oversight and move toward a true audit of the Fed. And then we also have to start talking about the business cycle, because everybody's unhappy with unemployment. You know, even though I disagree with so much what the Fed does and what the Congress does, I don't know of anybody who says, you know, what we have to work on is more unemployment. We like unemployment. They really don't. So, but if they understand the business cycle and how the Fed creates the business cycle, all of a sudden we're talking about very serious matters. So we need to get people to understand the connection. And then what really needs to be done, and I hope I'm able to do that, is talk about monetary reform. You know, how do we reform the system? Because some people say, you want to get rid of the Fed, what's going to happen? Does it exist? Well, you don't have to worry that much. Things could be much better, because things are getting very bad with the Fed, and there are alternatives. So we want to talk about monetary reforms. Internationally, they're already talking about reforms. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, they've already started talking about the reforms that they know are coming.
And speaking of international affairs, we've seen so many protests all over Europe against the austerity measures. The big question is austerity coming to the United States? In what form? And are we going to see a similar reaction like the one that we're seeing all across Europe?
I think so. I think there's going to be a lot of unhappy people, but a lot of people say, well, in order to clean up the mess we have to sacrifice. I don't see it as sacrifice. I see that if the people are working hard and they want to take care of themselves, if you get rid of the income tax and get rid of the regulations, they can make more money and they can be more responsible. They don't have to sacrifice a thing. So when you take away the goodies, if you take away the bailouts for the big corporations and the easy credit and all these fancy contracts.
But when you have all these lobbyists on the Hill, I mean, you've worked here for quite some time now, you know how it works. How is that ever going to happen?
Well, let's hope so, because this system won't last. So the big question is when it falls apart, what are we going to replace it with? And I think there's hints that we're going to do better. I mean, there has been an election. There are a lot of new people coming. And I think that's a sign that the American people are sending people up here who are saying enough is enough, and we need to have, get our house in order.
Let's talk about the situation in the Koreas. You have a very interesting opinion about this. You've said, or you've hinted before, that the Korea conflict may have been orchestrated to boost the dollar. What do you mean by that? It's a pretty shocking claim, and one that we don't really hear very often.
Well, you know, I don't know whether it's so directly as much as a repercussion. When these incidents occur, people rush to the dollar. But that's really just very temporary. But with my non-interventionist foreign policy, I just don't like to see a saber rattling by going over there with our ships and all. The analogy I draw to this is, we have a problem on our Texas and U.S.-Mexican border. What if the interests of China, what if they thought it was in their interest and they had an alliance with Chavez in Venezuela? What if they had war games in the Gulf of Mexico? We'd be hysterical, but we think nothing of saying, well, there's a problem over there and we got to show them our might, and we're going to go over there and we're going to set all these rules and dictate what's going on in Korea. I think if we hadn't stayed in Korea, it would be one country right now. I sincerely believe that.
Do you think that, what's going to happen with the situation? Is it going to escalate? I know they're trying to put pressure on China. Is China going to do anything? And if not, is the United States more likely to get involved? I mean, it's already bogged down.
We're way too much involved in China. China has a greater interest. I mean, I think we have a greater interest in what happens in Cuba than China should. So, I mean, that's in their neighborhood, and I think we should back away, and I think Japan and China, South Korea, they should decide what to do. I think China, as a matter of fact, I think South Korea is quite capable of taking care of themselves. But if we always say, no matter what happens, we're going to be there and we're going to fight your war for you, I think that encourages a lackadaisical attitude about resolving their differences.
You're one of very few politicians, members of Congress, senators, who actually come out and say something like that. You know, that analogy that you made with China and Chavez. But why do you think that is? There seems to be, you know, whether anything that has to do with national security, whether it comes to defense spending or anything like that, sort of sacred cow. It's an issue that you don't touch because you never want to be perceived weak on national security. I mean, you and I had just talked about this. You got reelected, no problem. You've been saying these things for years and years now.
Well, I think there's a natural tendency, especially for men and male leaders, to be macho, and their country and their citizens don't like you to be wimpish. And they don't want you to be weak, and they want you to stand strong. And then when a woman gets in charge, she wants to prove she's manly enough. So I think it's ingrained in our system. But I'm convinced that taking a position that I have takes every bit as much conviction and belief as somebody who thinks that the solution is always violence. I just approach it more from that we can do it with nonviolence. And I really abhor the idea that we're so often, our whole world, just think I've lived a good many years of the 20th century now, and it's perpetual war. Our history has shown that. I just don't think it should be necessary. I mean, there are other ways to resolve our problems. And,
well, speaking of a politician or a former politician who tells a lot of other politicians to man up, Sarah Palin, your fellow Tea Party member, leader, telling Barbara Walters recently that if she were to run for president in 2012, that she believes that she could beat Barack Obama. Just wanted to get your opinion on that.
Well, I guess that's a possibility, you know.
Would you support her if she ran for president in 2012?
Well, I think it's too early to tell. She's not even a candidate.
But as far as, you know, capability, that's the big question. A lot of the sort of establishment Republicans come out and said, you're no Ronald Reagan, you know, this is not going to happen for you.
Well, I don't care to make a lot of criticism or endorsements of Sarah Palin.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank